前か。漢字勉強してるか。漢字ってさ、難しいんだよ。だけど、毎日勉強を続けてちゃんと頑張ったら、お前も漢字を読めるようになるんだ。これから俺は練習に戻る。じゃあな。I want you to stop whatever you're doing, watch this video, get a notebook, and get it done already. Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. So let's get immediately to the point. How do you learn the Japanese kanji? Now let me spend just a few seconds for those of you who don't actually know what kanji are. Well, in Japanese you've got three writing systems: hiragana, katakana and kanji. Now hiragana and katakana are both syllabic systems. They are quite simple to learn. You can memorize them in just a fortnight or a couple of weeks, for those who don't know that British expression. And those are not a problem. So what do you use them for? Katakana is mostly used for writing foreign words, foreign names and foreign words. And sometimes the Japanese, they use it also when they chat. Because when you chat in English, if we want to give the idea of, or the impression of screaming or speaking with a very loud voice, you write everything in capital letters. Where in Japanese, you don't really have a difference between capital letters or non-capital letters. So what you do, you just write everything in katakana if you want your interlocutor to think that you're actually screaming. Hiragana is mostly used for, you can write some nouns and some adjectives in hiragana, but most of the times hiragana is used for grammatical functions. You use it for conjugating verbs, so the actual parts of a verb or an adjective which needs to be changed. And other times you use it for particles, everything that has to do with grammar. So the entire rest of the language is written in kanji, whether it be personal names, names of places, verbs, nouns, adjectives, everything is written in kanji. Now let me remind you that I am a qualified teacher of Japanese. I have lived in Japan for 4 years and I do have a university degree in Japanese. So one of the first questions that my students ask me is, Raf, how many kanji are there? Now this is the wrong question to ask. Why? Because no one really knows. I mean, you've got huge dictionaries both for Chinese and Japanese which tell you that there are as many as 50,000 kanjis, or perhaps even 85,000 kanjis. But that doesn't really matter because most of these kanji are not used. Most of these kanjis cannot be read by natives. So the real question is, how many kanji do I need in order to achieve said goal? For instance, if you want to actually go to Japan and be able to read and understand mostly anything, then you will need around 2,000 to 3,000 kanji. If you just want to understand an email or exchange some texting in Japanese with your Japanese friends, or perhaps even reading a letter, although this latter one will be slightly harder because of handwriting, and it can become actually very hard depending on how bad the handwriting of the actual Japanese writer is. But if you want to learn this, you might manage with around 1,000 kanji. So as you can see, the numbers are still very high. How can you memorize so many characters? They look complex, they look complicated. Well, it all has to do with, first of all, your mental approach. You see, many students, when they start learning kanji, they learn the first 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, and when they're getting closer to 100, many give up. They quit. Why? Because they see it's actually difficult to write some of these. Not all the kanji are difficult to write, some are super simple, depending on the number of strokes, and we'll get back to what number of strokes actually means. But some kanji are simple, some kanji are extremely complex. And people get confused with the fact that in Japanese, kanji can have many different possible readings. And many people give up, because they think that things will always be that difficult, and they multiply the actual difficulty that they are feeling at the time, experiencing at the time, for the entirety of the numbers that we mentioned, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 kanji, and they give up. What they don't know, and what you might not know, is that kanji become easier with time. When you reach around 200 to 300 kanji, the essential components of these kanji, which are normally called radicals or bushu in Japanese, or bushou in Chinese, these essential components that make up the majority of kanji will start repeating themselves. What this means is that after learning or having memorized 200 to 300 kanji, you will start recognizing parts of these kanji. It won't be just a drawing that you need to copy, but it will become, oh, that's the same piece of that kanji that I learned a few days ago. What that means is that you will already know how to write that piece, and this will make the memorizing process easier. But things will become significantly easier once you surpass number 1000, roughly speaking. Because this is when kanji will start to repeat themselves. This is something actually that you can start experiencing very early in your study or in your journey in learning the Japanese language. For example, let's say that you learned this kanji here, which means new, and we will read now with its on yomi or original Sino-Japanese reading. We will talk more in detail about this in a moment, and we read it as shin. Then we learned this kanji, which means to hear. Then let's say you go around with your Japanese friend, and your Japanese friend tells you that he wants to buy a newspaper. And then you ask him out of curiosity, can you show me how you write a newspaper? And he tells you, yes, newspaper is, we say shimbun, and we write it like this. New, listen. And there you are. You don't need to learn the kanji for newspaper. You already know them. You just needed to know that if you put them together, they will make that meaning. So, perseverance, endurance is the key to learn kanji. Understanding that if you go through the first uphill slope, which might look steep, you will eventually reach the top of the mountain, where the first 1000 kanjis are, and then it will be a downhill slope. Don't give up at the beginning. It will get easier. So how many kanji do I know? Well, I've lost count, and you will as well, no matter the effort you put into counting the number of kanji you know. But I think I know between 2,000 to 3,000. I think I'm around 2.5, 2.8, I'm not sure, I've lost count. The reason why I say that is because I can mostly read anything in Japanese. Occasionally I have to look up how to write a kanji perhaps, because it is actually easier to read some kanji than it is to write them. But this is something that happens also to the Japanese, the natives themselves. Many Japanese don't have a clue how to write a kanji. Perhaps they did know, but they actually forgot. Why? Because now, today's generation, they all use the mobile phone. Then the mobile phone is suggesting you the kanji. You don't actually have to physically write it. And this is becoming an actual problem in Japan. Most Japanese, young Japanese, they know how to write simple kanji, but when you move into more specific or technical kanji, they will have to look it up. They can read it, but they can't write it. I can say with quite a lot of confidence, since I have lived in Japan, as I said, that it did happen quite a lot of times that I could write a kanji that a Japanese couldn't. Okay, this is all impressive, but how do you actually memorize them? Well, we did say that kanji have components. These are called radicals. Now, these radicals have two functions. There are around 214, although the number has been debated by several dictionaries, so it doesn't matter, but there are around 200 radicals. These radicals are basic components of the kanji. They have two specific functions. Function number one, which is the most common one, is to give you the semantic field. What semantic field means is that the radical will give you a hint to what the kanji has to do with. For instance, this is the kanji for water, when it's used as a radical, so as a component of a more complex kanji, which will be made of several different pieces. You will find it in this way, and if you look at it, they look like drops of water. This is its pure radical form, used as a component. If you put it together with another kanji, it will create a construct, a compound version. So this is its radical form. So, for example, the word for the sea, the word for crying, and the word for alcohol all have the radical water, because they all have to do with liquids. But another function that radicals have is to suggest you or give you a hint as far as the sound or pronunciation of the kanji is concerned. But this is a much rarer situation, and most of the times you will just have to know it by memory. So for instance, the way you read a kanji, how can I know that this kanji is actually read mizu? Well, it's the same way you know how to read the numbers in your language. When you see this symbol, you know that it's read 4 or 4 or 4. But how do you know? It's not written, it's not spelled, it's just mnemonical. Well, this is how the entire language works as far as Japanese is concerned. You just know, by memory, this symbol is read mizu, because you recognize that it means that that very shape will mean water. Now, some kanji are actually pictographics. They are logograms that actually represent what they want to mean. For instance, this one here, which means mountain, and it's read Yama. And it does look like a mountain, or for example, the kanji for the moon, which you can sort of recognize as a half moon shape, and the two lines being perhaps little clouds covering it a little bit, which has some reference to Japanese literature, but I won't go into this mono no aware and that kind of stuff, but we're not talking literature in this video. But this is actually just the minority of kanji. The minority of characters actually represent others, what they mean graphically. Most of them are again either mnemonical, or they are just the addition or conjunction of concepts, like the idea of here, something new, which means newspaper. So here is a question for you. Do you study kanji every day? If the answer is yes, you can continue watching this video. If the answer is no, choose another language. You have to have daily interaction with kanji. If you don't do this, your brain will not store this new data. Now, of course, living in Japan makes this easier, as you are surrounded by kanji all the time. But even in your own country, even in your own little room, you can do just that. A good idea is to buy a whiteboard, for example, and perhaps write a different kanji every day, a kanji that you will see, okay, throughout the day, and perhaps you will try writing. You could write that maybe 1, 2, or 3 kanji per day could be a good goal, just practicing to write those kanji. But another important thing could be to just write down cards and put them on top of the objects. For example, learn the kanji for fridge, learn the kanji for floor, learn the kanji for wall, book, for anything you have in your room or in your home, and put these little cards next to the objects that they represent. This helps you put an image together with the symbol and put them together. Another thing you can do is every few days you can actually switch them backwards, so you flip them so you don't actually see it, and then you have to see if you can remember it, if you can actually write it, or you can just mix them up, okay? So perhaps you don't want to just glue them, okay? Just put them there. You can just mix them up and see if you can recognize them outside context. But what is key to the memorization of kanji is consistency, persistence, endurance. You need to make kanji become part of your daily life. If it's something you really want to do, you need to give it all of yourself. It doesn't mean you've got to do 5 hours of kanji every day. I did at one point, but that's because I needed to take exams and university tests. So I did for a few, perhaps a month, okay, like 4 or 5 hours of kanji. But you don't need to do that throughout the entirety of your linguistic journey, particularly if you don't actually need to pass exams like soon. But what you can do is make sure that perhaps in the morning, you just take 15-20 minutes and you just review a few kanji. And then in the afternoon, if you got a little bit of time, you're going out, but you're going to the gym, bring your kanji notebook with you. So if you have some time on the train, for example, or you're waiting for the bus, here is a good opportunity for you to just practice writing a few kanji. Try practicing sentences. In fact, it's a good idea to put the kanji into the sentence together with hiragana and sometimes katakana, because in Japan, differently from Chinese, kanji alone are very rare, occasionally, but most of the times you will have kanji integrated with hiragana. So it's a good idea to just write a phrase, like try telling yourself, like writing a journal, okay? Tell yourself what you're doing. For example, watashi wa basu wo matte imasu. I am waiting the bus. Bus is katakana, watashi is kanji, wa is hiragana. So there you go, you can practice everything. That's a good idea to put the kanji into a context. And of course, on your phone you can just have your kanji dictionary, so you can look them up if you don't remember them. In the evening, just before going to bed, or perhaps while you're watching TV or whatever you're doing, you might want to spend an extra 15 minutes again, 15-20 minutes to review a few kanji, and you've done it. So it's 1 hour of work spread out throughout the entire day, particularly used in those moments that you've got nothing to do anyways. Like as I said, when you're on the train, if you've got like a 30 minutes ride, or perhaps you're in the car with your dad and he's taking you to school and there is a lot of traffic and you're stuck in a traffic jam, or you've been caught in traffic, you can utilize that time. But kanji needs to become a daily habit. It's the only way to learn it. Now, I did mention strokes and stroke order. Now, strokes are important for 2 reasons. The reason number 1 is that you need to know how to draw the kanji. Don't just make it up yourself. Look at the guides you can find anywhere on Google or Japanese books. They tell you first top to bottom, left to right, and then they tell you how to write it. This is important not only because otherwise if you just make it up, the final product will be different and a native will recognize that there is a mistake there. And kanji is a very specific way of writing things. But secondly, you will mess up the number of strokes, and the number of strokes meaning that, for example, this kanji is written with 2. You can't just do this, okay? Otherwise you just write it with 1. And that's problematic when you in the future will start having to look kanji up on the dictionary, as on the dictionary kanji are listed by the number of strokes. So how many strokes does this kanji have? 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'll look it up on the 3 strokes kanji list. But if you don't actually learn that, it will be problematic because you won't be able to recognize, to know it. So, how long before you can actually use kanji effectively? You might need a couple of years to start reading email. For manga, a lot of my students are 15, 16, so they do ask me about manga. For reading manga, luckily for you, manga uses furigana. Furigana means that you have hiragana written on the side or the top of the kanji, and it tells you how to read it. That makes it a lot easier, not only for knowing how to read the kanji, but also for looking it up, for example, on Google or anywhere. You don't actually need to use a stroke order because you already know how the kanji is written. So you can just look it up immediately, see if the kanji is the same, and then you know what it means. But this is something that they do because most Japanese who read manga are teenagers, and teenagers still don't know all the kanji. So it's more of a kids thing, so to speak. So in the future, as an adult, you will need to learn to read kanji without furigana. So manga, not particularly difficult. If you know hiragana, you can look up the kanji on the spot, and it will be easier to read manga. Although, depending on the manga, you will find very difficult technical scientific kanji as well. So perhaps you will find kanji that you don't actually need to learn, or perhaps they wouldn't be your highest priority at the moment. For example, if you watch Death Note, you will learn kanji for a heart attack, like Shinzo Mahi, Shinzo Hossa. Perhaps you will learn other medical things, like, for example, Koten Seimen Ekizen Shokogun. Yeah, lovely if you can read and write it in kanji, but if you can write and read that, but you can't write and read I'm hungry or I want to buy a pizza, then I'd rather go first learn the others, and then you can learn Koten Seimen Ekizen Shokogun. Nozasho no shoujo. That's a cool set of kanji. But if you want to learn kanji, meaning that you want to go to Japan and be able to read and write everything similarly to a Japanese, it will take you 7 to 8 years to learn it. Make it into a daily activity, a daily habit. Learn the proper stroke order. Try to put kanji around you as much as possible, particularly the new ones, and get to work. Alright then, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. 君ならできる。頑張れ。じゃあね。